Spider-Man, one of the all-time great Marvel superheroes. And since we've got a new game coming out in Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4, I figured I'd use this opportunity to talk to you guys about the past of Spider-Man games. We'll look at why people love Spider-Man games as much as they do, and we'll finally come around full circle and talk about the new Spider-Man game for the PlayStation 4. Just for time's sake, we're going to be focusing on the main console entries for the most part, leading up to what makes Spider-Man such a fun character to play as, and all the mechanics and story from past games that contributed to Insomniac's new version of Spider-Man. So let's get into it and talk about, 1960s meme Spider-Man. What are you doing here?
Well, come on, man. You can't talk about Spider-Man games without Spider-Man, can you?
Well, I guess not, but I don't really think you're the kind of Spider-Man that would be appropriate for this kind of...
Aw, come on, dude. You're breaking my bowels here, man. You're breaking my bowels.
Fine. But you only get one chance, you hear me? After that, we're done.
Hey, thanks. And I promise, you won't regret it.
This is the history of Spider-Man games.
Hey, bro, you got any Cheetos around or anything?
Would you just concentrate on the video? Now, I know the first Spider-Man game actually came out in 1982, and the first games of my childhood experience were Spider-Man Maximum Carnage and Separation Anxiety for the Super Nintendo. But I wanted to cover a little more recent history of Spider-Man just because I feel like this Spider-Man for the PlayStation 1 was one of the first ones that really put Spider-Man on the map as far as the current mechanics that are used today. Because it was one of the first games where, for its time, you actually felt like Spider-Man swinging around the city. And I feel like this game contributed a lot to the way that we perceive Spider-Man today in current games. One of the first things you'll notice when you boot this game up is it does have quite a bit going for it. There's a gallery mode in which you can view collected comics that you find throughout the game, time trials, fighting waves of enemies in survival mode, races to see how fast you can get from one end of a stage to another. They even have a specific cheat menu which unlocks various things such as costumes and a what if mode, which we'll get into all that later. First we'll dive into the main meat of the game. So as you're seeing here, standard difficulty selection screen, but the interesting thing is that they actually have a kid mode which makes the controls a little bit easier and makes you practically invincible, so even young kids could play through the game, and I thought that was a smart decision on their part, making the game accessible to all ages, because believe me, there is a challenge if you want it in this one. So the game starts off as Doc Ock, seemingly benevolent instead of evil all of a sudden, is doing a demonstration at a science expo. Meanwhile, Peter Parker and Eddie Brock are there covering the event for the Daily Bugle. All of a sudden, an imposter Spider-Man attacks, stealing the technology from Dr. Octopus. All the while, Peter Parker and Eddie Brock watch on as Spider-Man, the imposter, takes the device, and Peter Parker wonders what the heck is going on and why this imposter Spider-Man is here. And while Eddie Brock is trying to take pictures, the imposter Spider-Man steals his camera and destroys it, angering Brock and causing him to transform into Venom. Meanwhile, a mysterious fog is released throughout the lower area of the city, making it impossible for Spider-Man to travel down in the streets below.
Yeah, it was just a way for Neversoft to not have to program the lower part of the city because they were lazy.
I think it had more to do with the graphical limitations of the PlayStation 1. Actually kind of clever if you think about it. They still offered you a way to swing around in 3D knowing that they wouldn't be able to fully render environments of an entire city. That didn't come until later. Another step they took to give it that true authentic Spider-Man feel was having none other than Stan Lee himself introducing many of the levels.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble. But this is just the beginning, Spidey fans. So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
Oh, you know what? I kinda like that dude.
Well, I would hope so. He created you.
Oh, no. The internet created me.
Anyway, for the first crack at this, Neversoft really did an excellent job making you feel like Spider-Man with the limitations that they had to work with. And it's understandable with the pedigree that they had working on the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series for the PlayStation as well.
Oh man, I love those games. Awesome soundtrack, great gameplay, this warehouse level was the best.
I know, it's sweet. We should play it later. Sorry, got a little off track there. And while the game did offer a pretty authentic experience for its time, it definitely wasn't without its flaws as well. The combat's a little clunky and you don't always swing where you want to. There's no way to adjust the camera outside of turning and waiting for the camera to spin around behind you. You don't always go where you want to when you swing, and Spidey automatically sticks to any wall, which can lead to some frustrating situations, especially when you're trying to chase somebody in a level or run away, which happens in a lot of levels in this game. Like this stage where you're being chased by a police attack helicopter. It's fun at first, but then it just keeps going on and on and on. Then there's one where you spend a whole level chasing Venom, and that one gets pretty frustrating. If you lose him for even a split second, he'll escape and you have to restart the whole thing all over again. Oh, come on, no, geez!
Slowpoke?
Oh, I keep getting stuck on these stupid buildings. Okay, wait, I know exactly where he's going. Don't make me Oh!
Slowpoke?
Okay, at this point I am positive the game is mocking me because he gets ahead of me so fast. Oh, damn it!
Slowpoke?
Okay, that's great and all, but are you gonna stop sucking anytime soon so we can move on?
I'm trying. There is a pretty funny sequence in this stage once you get to it, though.
Yeah, look out, lady.
Oh my goodness!
Get out of my way, nerd! Watch that first step, Parker. It's a doozy.
Ow, my head! Oh, toe, ow!
Yeah, look out, lady.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, sorry, lady. Didn't see a thing.
Also, for being a superhero that usually takes to the skies, you spend an inordinate amount of time underground in sewers and tunnels. But again, I'm assuming it's probably because of the limitations of the PS1 that they decided to take this game in this direction. But getting back to the positives, there are some pretty neat cameos by other characters in the Marvel Universe. You had the likes of the Human Torch, a poster of Wolverine while you're climbing the building running from the helicopter, as well as Daredevil, the Punisher, and even Captain America at the end of the game. And Spider-Man fights his typical rogues gallery of villains in this game too. You'll face Carnage, Venom, Doc Ock, Mysterio, Rhino, Scorpion, and more. So definitely a lot of fan service in this game. And as in a lot of Spider-Man games, Black Cat comes in throughout the game. She helps you out a little bit in the tutorials, and you have to rescue her.
Wait. I just have to mention something. Look at that face. What is going on with that thing?
Well, that was the case on a lot of PlayStation games because of the power of the system. It didn't enable very high polygon counts on the character models, and they had to paste the faces on a lot of them, most likely to minimize the use of system resources.
Well, no thanks, because I know for a fact that Black Cat is way hotter than that.
Okay. Well, this game did do a lot for the future Spider-Man games in the series because of some of the mechanics that were implemented, and at that time there were quite a few new concepts that are still used today. One of the most well-known of those is the ability to web zip and instantly go to the ceiling. This was used in later games as a means to swing around the city and instantly change direction as you moved around the buildings. You also had Spider-Man's web fists, which would be used in later games such as Edge of Time. You also see the web ball, which is a pretty common move for Spider-Man, as you'll see it in games that were released before and after this one in the Marvel vs. Capcom series.
Ah yes, the web ball. My ultimate spam move.
I know it is. You're almost as bad as Ryu. So yeah, obviously lots of great web-slinging action in this game for the time. But before we get done with this one and move on to Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation 1, I wanted to mention something that this game in particular brought to the table that all of the other Spider-Man games up to this point sorely lacked. And that's something that we all love about Spider-Man and that makes him who he is. His corny but witty sense of humor.
You gotta be kidding. Okay, recap. A couple of 100 feet underwater, electrified floors and walls, and deadly turrets pointing straight at me. Oh, my day just keeps getting better and better.
Spider-Man in this game was voiced by Rino Romano, who also voiced Spider-Man in Spider-Man the New Animated Series, which unfortunately only ran for one season in 2003. He's actually been in tons of different video games and animated series as a voice actor. He also voiced Batman in the 2004 to 2008 The Batman animated series, and you may also recognize him as Luis Serra in Resident Evil 4. Now, his quips weren't always the best. There was a lot of repeat audio in there, but I think he did a good job delivering the most fully realized version of Spider-Man that we had to date.
Are you kidding me? This guy's got nothing on me. I'm the master, baby.
Let's just get to the end of the game. So Spider-Man finds out that Doc Ock is behind the whole thing, and that he was using Mysterio to trick people into thinking that Spider-Man was the one who stole the technology. And he goes to his lair to shut down his poison mist machine. This also frees Black Cat, who is imprisoned by Doc Ock. You then find out that Doc Ock was in collusion with Carnage, and after defeating Dr. Octopus in a fairly easy boss battle, Venom is also defeated by Carnage, and you then have to fight Carnage.
Whoa, that dude is scary. Screw that.
Don't worry, that boss battle's fairly easy, but the sequence that comes after that is the most annoying part in the entire game easily. After defeating Carnage, the symbiote leaves Cletus Cassidy's body, and while Spider-Man's thankful that he was able to save the day once again, the symbiote combines with Dr. Octopus, creating a super monster that Spider-Man has no hope to defeat and has to run away from. And all the while, he's just behind you screaming,
Yeah, no, I'm done. Out of F's to give. Screw this. Bye-bye.
Well, I gotta admit, you picked a good time to take a break, 60 Spider-Man, because this sequence is very annoying. You can't make one single mistake, and if you do, he will catch up to you and kill you, and you'll have to start the whole sequence all over again. This happened to me. I was almost to the end, and I had to restart the entire thing. But once you do finish the sequence, it shows Spider-Man leaving the facility as it explodes. The flames from the explosions burned off the symbiote from Dr. Octopus, and Spider-Man escapes with Black Cat, Captain America, and Venom. The final sequence of the game then shows all of the heroes playing cards and all the villains in prison having to deal with the stupidity of Rhino. So definitely kind of a silly ending, but they are in the Amazing Universe. A lot of the characters are pretty corny and hammy. After you beat the game, they give you plenty of incentive to keep playing. You initially unlock the symbiote Spider-Man costume, which gives you unlimited webbing. But there are plenty of other costumes to unlock as you play through the game and meet certain conditions. Or you can just put in the cheat code and unlock everything instantly like I did. The most powerful of which is the Captain Universe costume, which makes you invulnerable, gives you enhanced strength, and unlimited webbing. And there are also costumes that make it harder by giving you limited amounts of cartridges that you can carry. But definitely the weirdest cheat code that you have in this game unlocks something called the What If mode, which is a little bonus mode that Neversoft threw into the game to give you incentive to play it again, as if all these other unlocks weren't enough. It'll change things as subtle as Neversoft's logo being on one of the buildings in the first level when you start, to much more ridiculous stuff like Spider-Man boogieing in the bank, or him getting sucked up into a printing press. Either way, it makes the game worth playing through a second time just to see what kind of crazy Easter eggs will come up next. And after all the great things that Neversoft did to represent Spider-Man, there would be a new developer taking the reins for the sequel, Spider-Man 2. Enter Electro.
Previously on Spider-Man.
Who dares? Face me, coward! Face a worthy foe! Spider-Man?
He's stealing Octavius's device! That was Eddie Brock.
I don't want to believe that you pulled off the heist today, but I've got to make sure.
Daredevil!
That leaves one question. Where's Rhino?
Cat!
Phase 1 completed. Let us begin Phase 2.
No one can control the symbiotes. No one!
And now, Spider-Man 2.
So Spider-Man 2 very similar in a lot of ways to Spider-Man 1 on the PlayStation. So we won't spend a ton of time covering Spider-Man 2 here just because it is so similar mechanically, graphically, the same voice actors for the most part. So there's not a lot to talk about that's brand new, but we'll still look at the story and any big differences between the two games. But as you're seeing here with the suits, they do have multiple suits here as well. The main difference here being that you can pick each power with individual suits, so you can wear the suit you want for the look and then pick the individual powers, which was a nice touch, I thought.
Hey, is the big scary Carnage monster gone?
Yeah, he's gone. We already moved past that game. We're on to the second one now.
Yeah. Glad I could help. Just another day in the life of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
You didn't even do anything. Anyway, the game opens with a mysterious figure coming in to steal an item from a research facility. Shortly into the cutscene, the villain reveals himself to be the title character, Electro. Shortly after that, you find out that Captain America actually got credit for Doc Ock being put in jail, and Spider-Man still listed as being a menace.
Jameson's such a dick.
Shortly after finding out about the robbery, Spider-Man goes to investigate. And that's where the game begins as a direct sequel to Spider-Man 1. The first difference you'll notice is that this time Beast enters the fray in the tutorial section of the game instead of Black Cat, and he's not the only X-Man to make an appearance, as this time you'll get the opportunity to enter the Danger Room with Xavier and Rogue during training and tutorial missions. The other big difference being is that there's actually street level missions in this one, as there's no fog to hold you back like there was in the first game. Now these definitely aren't full city scale missions, as they just load up small grids of the city that you can traverse through and climb buildings as well as being on the street. But the new development team behind this one, Vicarious Visions, definitely made some improvements to this one and optimized the engine a little more to allow you more freedom as you traverse the levels.
Ooh, whoopity-doo, you can be on the streets. What a big improvement.
Just chill out, we'll get there. There's still a lot of improvements to come as the hardware advances. But they do still have quite a few levels in this game where you can't go down to the streets below and you'll automatically die should you fall below the buildings. But that's one of the biggest issues I would say with this game, is that it does feel like mostly a copy and paste job, even though Vicarious Visions did make some small improvements like I said. There are a lot of reused assets, some of the same voice clips are used. Most of the music seems less interesting overall, and they use the same small sample loop similar to the first game, where they loop the same small music clip over and over again. And aside from the fog being gone on the streets below on some levels, it doesn't really make many strides in the graphics department. And as I said before, Spider-Man's moveset is essentially the same. You can shoot web balls in the air now, which is a very necessary skill to master as you go on in the game, as well as tie up enemies from the ceiling if you want to take a more stealthy approach. And they do try to mix up a few sections by adding little extra puzzles and things that you have to do, like this part here where you have to shoot webbing at the elevator cable before it snaps. But there really isn't a whole lot more variety to make it any more interesting than the first game. In fact, it does take some steps back in some areas, mainly the level design. Like this level in a train yard where you have to turn on power to open a door. You don't realize till you get to the end of the level that you have to turn on generators in a specific order in order to turn on the final generator at the end. Vicarious Visions apparently loved going through and turning on switches because they do it a lot in these levels, much more so than the first game seemed to do. Without a doubt, one of the most frustrating aspects of this game is when you get to the final levels. Like there's this part where you have to go through multiple force fields and you have to deactivate switches in a certain order. The first switch is way up on a wall, and if you don't make it in time, the walls will electrocute you and you'll fall to your death. The second switch is in a room full of robot sentries that constantly regenerate unless you destroy all of the regeneration devices before you hit the switch. The third switch is located in a room with laser guns that are constantly shooting at you, and you have to dodge them and destroy the laser guns at the same time before you can access the switch. Finally, after you get through all that, the fourth switch is located in a room where you have to adjust the temperature in order to hide yourself from the sentry robots, and if you fail, all the robots will attack you, and it doesn't take long for you to get killed. And what's your reward for getting through all that, you ask? Why, it's a giant room with lasers and security that you have to climb for eternity to get to the top. Alright!
Okay, this is getting a little boring. Can we just speed this up so we can see what happens in the end here?
No problem, I was thinking the same thing.
Deja vu, I just been in this place before. Higher on the street, and I know it's my time to go. Going new, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Whoa, deja vu, I just been in this time before. Higher on the beat, and I know it's a place to go. Going new, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Yeah.
So after the requisite sets of boss fights with villains such as the Shocker, Lizard Man, and Sandman, you finally get to Electro and find out that he was planning on using this vest to enhance his own power, as the device would enhance a normal human's power, so much so that they could power an entire city block with their own energy. So in the hands of Electro, it would basically make him a god. After defeating Electro the first time, the scientist that invented the vest attempts to grab the sapphire emerald needed to power it. Spider-Man gets the emerald, but Electro gets the scientist, and during an exchange, Spider-Man attempts to take the scientist and get the gem at the same time. Spider-Man misses the gem, however, and Electro gains control of the ultimate power that he desired. This exchange of events leads to probably the most interesting aspect of this game, and what it will be remembered for is the final alterations that were made to the game due to the September 11th, 2001 attack on the Twin Towers in New York City. Due to the release of the game being in October of that year, decisions were made by Activision and Vicarious Visions in the final sequence of the game to alter the Twin Towers that you were supposed to fight Electro on in the final battle. And instead the two buildings were connected by a small bridge to make them seem like one large building. The most interesting thing about this is that there were some pre-9/11 copies released as bootlegs and in other countries before they were able to alter all final versions of the game before it hit retail shelves. I do not have that version of the game. The version I have is the final retail version, but there are versions floating out there on eBay and other places if you know where to look. One other thing of note is they did change some of the names of the levels as well, presumably to reflect the level changes made in the game, and due to possible perceived insensitivity for American audiences. After beating Electro, the final sequence of the game showing that the Daily Bugle once again giving credit to somebody else, this time Thor, instead of Spider-Man. And as Spider-Man swings over the city, it flashes to the criminals that Spider-Man put in jail over the course of Spider-Man 2, and shows them playing cards similar to the heroes playing cards at the end of the first Spider-Man. You're then finally shown Doc Ock still beating his head against the wall due to Rhino's stupidity from the end of Spider-Man 1. Real quickly before we finish up, I did want to mention there is a what-if mode in this game as well, in which you can do such ridiculous things as ride a banana through one of the opening stages of the game, find some bananas on the street in one of the ground city levels, see more bananas on the stage where you're chasing the train and have to fight Sandman.
What's going on with these guys in bananas?
I don't really know. And play a little Pong. Spider-Man on the PlayStation 1 gave us a lot of great memories and laid the groundwork for what was to come on the new generation of Spider-Man games at the time. One game in particular would completely revolutionize how we control Spider-Man. So join me next time as we look at Spider-Man after the PlayStation 1, as we get into the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube era, as we look at Spider-Man 1 through 3 and Ultimate Spider-Man. So let me know down below, guys, what's your favorite Spider-Man game? Heck, maybe it's the new Spider-Man game, let me know. This is Dusty with Gaming Retrospectives, and I'll see you guys next time.
Oh yes, we finally get to talk about Spider-Man 2. It's pizza time, baby!
Yeah, it's pizza time.